All right. Good evening, guys. My name is James from Varsity Unlimited Tutors. I'm sure you already know me from the previous classes that we have been doing together. So we met last week and we did advanced programming concepts. We also did an introduction class for project scope and time management. Then we also did financial reporting and introduction to financial accounting last week on Thursday. So we're still continuing with the introduction free classes that we highlighted that we are going to do this week. So today we want to look at macroeconomics, and then later during this week, we are going to look also at business communication. And like I promised, we're going to have a second a free class for financial reporting and analysis on Thursday again. So we still, during this whole week, we're still going to be looking at some more free classes that we are going to do. I'm going to advise in the groups when each class is going to be held and etc. Then for those of you that want to join these lessons on a permanent basis, we are starting next week on Monday. The cost will be 800 Rand for each module. Installments are allowed, and the days, I'll post the official timetable, but every Monday we'll be doing macroeconomics essentials, or for those that are doing HR, it's called Fundamental of Macroeconomics. It's the same module, right? Then every Thursday, we'll be doing financial reporting and analysis. And for those that are doing accounting, introduction to financial accounting. Then every Wednesday, we'll be doing functional areas of management or fundamental business management. Then every Tuesdays, we will have project scope and introduction to project management. And then we'll also have business communication. I believe it will be on Saturdays. But I will post the official timetable on the groups on Friday. Once the free classes are done, I'll post so that you can make a choice whether you want to join or not. So in your first semester, I took you guys for microeconomics, which is my very, very strong point. I'm sure you guys enjoyed the classes. But for macroeconomics is not my strong point, but there is someone who is much, much better at teaching macroeconomics than me, and his name is Fortune. So he is the one who's going to be taking you through macroeconomics classes. So I will also be attending some of your classes, but you will also see me maybe at the end of the semester when you start doing exam preparation. You will see me there, but you are in very good hands. Fortune is an excellent tutor for macroeconomics. It has a little bit of some calculations, it has a little bit of some real life applications, and he has been tutoring this module for the past almost like 6 years now. So he's a very good person. I'm sure you'll be in very good hands. Then, yes, we do have information systems. Someone was asking for information systems. Yes, we do have information systems. I will advise when that will be done later on in the groups. All right. Fortune, I think you can go ahead.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. James, for the introductory remarks. I welcome you to this module, which is macroeconomics. So let me just give you an overview of what we're going to be looking at in terms of this particular module. All right. So the module is mainly made up of 9 units. So basically, we'll be looking at plus or minus 9 units, actually plus 9 units. And within those units, we'll try to look at the various lengths and breadths at which each particular topic comes with in relation to macroeconomics. So in terms of that, we'll try to look and also to incorporate some of the questions that come in relation to each particular topic, so that you'd be well versed in terms of how each particular topic is likely going to be examined on in terms of exams as well as your KCQs. All right, so in relation to that, we are going to be looking at each unit during each session, each particular session. given the length of the unit where possible. And we'll try to look at some of the various exam questions that would come along with that. So there are various question papers that we'll be looking at in relation to that. This is just an example of the question paper which was written in July 2023, which has various questions that we are also going to be looking at in relation to each particular topic. So it's made up of, I've noted that it's made up of 9 units. The first one is referred to as the Introduction to Macroeconomics, where you are just introduced to the differences between microeconomics and macroeconomics, and also in relation to introducing you to some of the key elements or key fundamentals in relation to macroeconomics. Then we have measuring the performance of an economy, where you're looking at how you measure in general the performance of the economy, which is what you're going to be looking at today, in terms of how we are going to be assessing the performance of an economy, looking at the definition of what an economy is, as well as some of the key performance indicators that are used to measure whether the economy is moving in the right direction or otherwise. Then there's also what is referred to as the monetary sector, where we look at various elements in relation to the monetary sector. We look at the institutions that you find within the monetary sector, the reserve banks, as well as the main entity that is traded within that particular sector, which is money itself. We look at the definitions of money and all of the encompassing elements surrounding the administration or within the monetary sector. Then beyond that, with the public sector, which is mainly in relation to what we refer to as the fiscal policy. The monetary policy looks at the monetary policy, the public sector looks at the fiscal policy of a particular nation, where we look at the institution, the main institution behind the public sector or behind the fiscal elements, which is the government. And also in relation to that, we look at various elements that come along with that, your tax administrations, as well as issues relating to state-owned entities, privatization, nationalization, etc. Then we're also going to be looking at macroeconomic theories, some of the theories, the key fundamental theories that come when it comes to policy making within a particular economy. We'll look at various schools of thoughts that evolved over time, from your classical to your Keynes schools of thought. And we'll also try to look at how they are applied in the current date scenario, as well as all the key fundamentals as well that surrounds that particular topic. Then beyond and above that, we have topics such as your inflation, where you look at your price stability, unemployment, economic growth and development, as well as the foreign sector. So we're going to be looking at these elements one by one, and also some of the questions that come along as a result of that. All right, so getting back to what we want to talk about today is an introductory session. I would ask if you are seeing my screen, if I can get a confirmation that you're seeing my screen, so that I do not end up.
Yes, we can.
All right, thank you. All right, so the first element that we need to understand is the distinction between the branches of economics. As James has alluded earlier on, that in the last semester, you guys were looking at what is referred to as microeconomics, which is another branch of economics. And there is the other side of it, which is referred to as the macro economics. So looking at these two branches of economics, we understand the differences in the approaches that we're going to be using in relation to some of the key terms that we're going to be applying, how it differs from your microeconomics. So with your microeconomics, the key elements that you're looking at, you are mainly looking at the individual or the individuals that are within a particular economy. You look at the individual markets that are there within a particular economy, as well as the individual entities that you find within a particular economy. So from that perspective, you're looking at it from what we refer to as a micro. From the word micro, you can understand in terms of magnitude that it's not that broad. It is a minimalistic approach when it comes to interpretation of these fundamentals. So when you're looking at microeconomics, That's why you find out that in relation to supply, we're looking at the supply of a particular good. So it was a supply of a particular good. Um, if it is demand, it's also demand of a particular good within a particular market, and it didn't go beyond that. So you'd find out that it would be in relation to individual elements within a particular market. So I'd refer to that as individual elements within a particular market, where you would look at those particular elements from their individual elements without looking at them from an aggregated perspective. So beyond and above that, we have what we refer to as macroeconomics. So within macroeconomic concepts, we are looking at the economy from a broader perspective. We are no longer looking at the individual elements, but we are looking at the aggregated elements. So when you're talking about supply or demand, in macroeconomics, we're no longer referring to the supply of a particular good. We're now referring to the aggregate supply, that is the total supply that is available within a particular economy. So now we are looking at the aggregated elements. So I would refer to that as aggregated elements within a particular economy. So what then comes from that is you get to have an understanding of the broader views of what is driving an economy. Of course, an economy is driven from the micro perspective, where it starts with individual trading, individuals exchanging goods, value for goods, etc. And beyond and above that, we're now looking at what is happening overally within a particular economic entity. So then in relation to that, you'll be looking at key statistics in relation to the overall production. So in microeconomics, we're talking about individual production. Now we'll be talking about the overall production within an entire economy, which we refer to as gross domestic product. We're going to be disanuling more on that. So that is very, very key when it comes to what we're going to be looking at. So beyond and above that, we can look at the differences between the markets. You're looking at microeconomics as the individual markets. Macroeconomics, it is the whole of the economy. Within microeconomics concepts, we're looking at the effect on the price of a good. Now, in macroeconomics, we're now looking at what we refer to as the general price level, usually associated with the consumer price index. I'm sure you've heard some of these terms more often than not in the news, or when State SA or the Reserve Bank governor is presenting their statistics, they give reference to some of these key elements. We're going to be looking at them and also highlighting how they affect the performance of an economy. So in terms of the labor market, you'll be looking at it from a micro perspective. It's an individual labor market, supply of a particular factor of production, which is in this particular instance, it's labor. Now we're looking at the total labor, where we use what we refer to as the unemployment rate to understand what is happening in terms of the absorption of labor within the whole of the economy. Then we have individual consumer behavior, which is in relation to individual demand. In macroeconomics, it would be aggregated demand, as we have alluded earlier on. All right, so now what becomes imperatively important is for you to understand what is it that we are talking about when you're talking about an economy. What are we referring to? What is it that comes to your mind when you hear the word economy? How do you define an economy? We've given key terms, we've given key elements in relation to how it differs from micro economic perspective. Now we want to understand what is it that we are looking at in relation to as the overall economy. All right, so coming to that, it is best explained with what we refer to as the circular flow of income and spending, which highlights the relationship that occurs between what we refer to as participants within an economy. And the relationship between these participants creates what we refer to as markets. So the markets that we're looking at in your microeconomics elements comes from the interaction between these participants that you're going to be talking about for now. All right. So in any economy, what makes an economy is the interaction between the participants. And in any economy, we have two main participants. which is number one, the households that you see on the bottom of this particular diagram here. So the households are referred to as the owners of the factors of production. So these ones, they own factors of production. So I'm sure in your microeconomics, you had a topic that was in relation to factors of production, where you looked at elements like labor, capital, entrepreneurship, um, um, as well as capital. So you find out that all of these, as well as natural resources. So you find out all of these are owned by what we refer to as the households. And there's also a second participant, which you refer to as the entities or the firms. So the entities are corporations that are created as a result of a need that arises within a market. You are an entrepreneur, you identify a particular market within an economy, you start an entity in order to fulfill that particular need that you've identified within that particular economy. So for you to be able to do that, you would need to make use of the resources um, um, uh, um,
Sorry,
yes.
pardon the interruption. I'm not sure if it's my screen, but we can't see the presentation. It's just stuck on page 78 of 90.
Oh, okay. Let me look at it.
Same as me.
Oh, okay. I thought everyone is seeing my presentation. Apologies for that. Let me get back to that.
Bonisiwe, your camera is on, my sister.
All right. Kindly switch off your cameras. All right. Are you able to see my screen now?
Yes.
Now we can see the diagram.
Oh, okay. All right. So let me just move back to what I'd explained earlier on so that we can have an understanding. So I was looking at my own screen, which everyone else wasn't seeing. Apologies for that. All right. So let's just have a restart of what I was talking about. Then we get to where I was. So we started by introducing the differences between the two branches of economics that are referred to as microeconomics and macroeconomics. And we've stated that within the microeconomics element of the subject of economics, that is where you looked at the individual elements within a particular economy. When you're talking about demand, you're talking about demand of a particular product or demand within a particular market of a certain product. If it is supply, you're looking at the supply of a certain product within a particular market, and it didn't go beyond that. And all of these elements, you'd find out that when you're looking at it from a microeconomics perspective, you were looking at the economy from an individual elements perspective. So beyond that, we have what we refer to as macroeconomics, and macroeconomics looks at the broader concept of the economy, where you look at an understanding in relation to the economy from a broader perspective. You're no longer looking at the individual elements within that particular market, but now you're looking at the aggregated elements. So when we're talking about aggregated elements, we're talking about the amalgamation of all of those individual elements into key sectors within a particular economy. We should be looking at it from an overall perspective. So in relation to that, we had the differences as well between these particular markets, between the microeconomics and the macroeconomics, where we had the individual markets that you get from a microeconomics perspective. When you're looking at markets, you're looking at individual markets, you're looking at the markets for agricultural produce, probably the market of maize, the market of tomatoes, the market of your sunscreens, whatever it is, any individual product that you look at from a microeconomics perspective, you'll be looking at it from the individual markets perspective. But from a macroeconomic perspective, you're now looking at the whole of the economy. So you're looking at the aggregated markets. So all of those markets aggregated, how much is it that they've produced? In terms of production, we'll be referring to that as gross domestic product, which we're going to be talking about later on. And in terms of the pricing, in macroeconomics, we're looking at the prices of individual goods within individual markets. We didn't look at the total pricing that is available within the particular economy, which we'll be looking at in terms of the macroeconomic perspective, which we refer to as the general price level, which looks at the aggregated prices within a particular economy, which then creates the subject of inflation, which we're also going to be looking at. Then in terms of the labor market, you would find out that in microeconomics, we're looking at the supply of a particular skill within a particular market and how the government probably would have intervened within that particular market to set minimum wages, etc. But now in macroeconomics, we're looking at the total employment of that particular, all the labor skills within a particular economy. And we'll be making use of a metric which we refer to as unemployment or full employment, which you're going to be looking at as well later on. Then we have the individual consumer behavior in relation to demand. Within microeconomics elements, we're looking at the individual demand of a particular product. In macroeconomics, we'll be looking at the aggregated demand, that is the demand, the total demand within the total of the economy. So the key question now that comes as a result of this is, what is it that we are referring to when we are talking about an economy? We've been talking about microeconomics, we've been talking about macroeconomics. What is it that we are talking about when we introduce the subject of economics? So what is an economy? So an economy can be defined as the relationship that occurs between interrelated participants within a particular economy. So within this, we have key elements that comes as a result of that. We have participants. So we need to have participants within this particular economy for it to be an economy. So you would need to have the relationship between those participants that arises from a micro perspective, getting into the macro perspective. So from the micro perspective, the relationship between the participants arises as a result of what we refer to as needs and wants that needs to be fulfilled. I'm sure you looked at needs and wants when you were introduced to microeconomics, to the subject of microeconomics, and how needs and wants would then shape the various elements that needs to be produced within that particular economy. So within a particular economy or within any economy or any definition of an economy, we have two main participants. The first one is the households. So the households are the owners of the factors of production. So the factors of production are those elements that we need to produce any good or service. Without them, you are not able to produce any good, you're not able to produce any service whatsoever. So you need the factors of production in order for you to produce any goods or service. So what is it that we're going to be producing? It is a good that is required by the market, that is by the same households. And as a result of that, you'll find out that that creates in itself the entities of firms. Firms, we understand from a business management perspective that these are individual legal personas that exist within a particular market in order to fulfill a particular need within a particular market. So firms can come in to produce different range of different goods and services that are required as a result of meeting the needs and wants that these particular households would be needing. So in relation to that, you'd find out that depending on the type of the economy, the firms in a free market economy, you'd find out that the firms can be anyone who tries to fulfill a particular need within a particular market. By starting an entity, you identify a particular market within an entity, within an economy, then you create an entity in order to fulfill that particular mandate. So there are various entities that we have currently from a services perspective, goods perspective, when you're producing goods that are required within a market, when you're retailing, all of these entities. So as a result of that, these entities, for them to produce goods and services that are required, they need to take advantage of the factors of production which the households are owning. And the factors of production come in relation to labor, capital, enterprising, natural resources, and all of these. And for them to have acquisition of these, they need to pay remuneration in order for them to have an acquisition of these particular factors of production. So in terms of that, you'd find out that the exchange that happens between the firms and the households creates a market which we refer to as the factor market. We've talked about the factor markets. So factor markets can be in relation to capital markets, can be in relation to labor markets, that in which these particular firms can take advantage of the households' factors of production. So in relation to that, within the factor market, this is where the firms get the factors of production, and they don't get them for free. There has to be a remuneration that they pay for these factors of production. That is where the first relationship occurs. There has to be an exchange of value for value here, where factors of production are supplied to the firms, and the firms are supplying back some form of remuneration back to the households. So the remuneration comes in different forms. If you're supplying your skills within the labor market, you are remunerated in form of wages and salaries. If you're supplying your capital within a particular labor market, you are remunerated in form of interest. If you started the entity yourself, you're remunerated in form of profits, which is sometimes referred to as the return on investments, whatever it might be, in terms of your financial management modules. All right. So in relation to that, you find out that that is where the first relationship occurs, where firms are acquiring the factors of production and the households are supplying, and in return, they are receiving an income. And on top of that, you'd find out that when the firms take advantage of the factors of production, they are now producing the goods and services that are required within that particular market in order to fulfill those particular needs. And that creates what we refer to as the goods market. So the goods and services market, this is where you now get your goods that you require, your services that you require from your basic needs to your self-actualization needs, to your self-esteem needs, whatever it is that you'd require according to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You'd find it within this particular goods market, which is as a result of the firms taking advantage of the factors of production, and they are now producing the goods and services that are required as per the households. So in terms of that, you'd find out that in order for you to acquire goods within the particular market, you don't just get them for free. There is a particular price that you pay in relation to that. That is where the firms are making an income from that through sales. And you can see from the arrows there's income and sales revenue, and the goods is flowing from the firms going to the households through the factor markets. All right. So if such an economy is created where individuals just buy and sell without any elements in relation to price controls or wage controls, whatever it might be, there's an element that we refer to as market failure. I'm sure you looked at market failure in your microeconomics elements. We're also going to be looking at it later on, but now we'll be looking at it in terms of government failure. So in relation to market failure, this occurs when the free market system is left to operate on its own, where the invisible hand that you were learning in your microeconomics is now failing to administer the needs that are required within that particular market, where you find out that the income that is received. I didn't hear that. Any question? All right. So in relation to that, am I audible? Let me just confirm if I'm still audible.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right. So in relation to that, you'd find out that when the market fails to administer the needs of the particular households, either by overproducing or underproducing or under-remunerating a particular supply of a particular factor of production, or when it fails to regulate production of certain goods and services, probably that are harmful to the society, that is where a market failure occurs. I'm sure you've looked at it in your microeconomics elements. We're also going to be looking at it later on. So that comes as a result of market failure, and that on its own necessitates the creation of a governing entity, which we refer to as the government. So the government comes in to fill in the gaps that the free market system does not allow on its own. As a result, the government comes in to produce certain goods and services that are not produced within that particular markets. So you find out that as firms are created, they are mainly profit-driven entities, and profit-driven entities only produce goods that are of a higher profit. They look at the return on investments, and they produce those goods that are likely going to be producing a higher return on their investments. So certain goods that are key to the society would then be left out. For instance, your public infrastructure, your roads, etc., would then be left out. And that now necessitates the creation of a government on its own. So I'm sure in relation to that, we're also going to be looking at the government sector, which is the public sector, which is your unit number 4, number 3, number 4, somewhere there, which we looked at the overview of the topics that we're going to be looking at. So you find out that the government comes in to administer all of the public goods and services that are not provided by the individual firms or by the private firms. And in relation to that, you'd find out that the government would need to have some form of revenue, some form of financial system. In order for it to do that, it needs to have some form of tax system. So this tax system comes as a result of the government's need to produce the goods and services that are not being produced by the free market system on its own. So taxation on the firms, taxation on the households in form of your VAT, value-added tax, in form of your income taxes, different types of taxations. We're also going to be looking at tax administration and how taxes are administered within a particular economy as well. So in relation to that, that creates all of these key elements that we have and that we refer to as an economy. So what you see here on your screen is what is referred to as a domestic economy. So in a domestic economy, we're only looking at an economy, how it interrelates within itself without including the external economies. So for instance, in South Africa, if you're looking at it from a South African perspective, this creates the domestic economy of South Africa without including the exports and the imports, the international trade that is taking place. We're also going to be looking at international trade at some point. But for now, we need to have an understanding of the working of this particular economy. So since we've defined what an economy is and how it functions, the key question that comes as a result of that is, how then do we measure performance of this particular economy, whether this economy is performing very well or whether this economy is not performing very well? So there is need for us to have a predefined approach when it comes to the measuring the performance of an economy in relation to how an economy can be economic performance can be measured. All right, so in relation to that, there is what is referred to as your macroeconomic objectives. Let me look at the study guide to see what unit is that, so that you can have a reference to that. So in terms of measuring the performance of the economy, I think that is your unit 2. You can look at your unit 2. I don't know which, from the version of the study guide that you have, I don't know which page would that be. So that is where you're looking at the measuring of the performance of an economy. So we need to have a predefined approach when it comes to measuring the performance of an economy. So that is your unit 2. So let me get back to my presentation. We need to have a predefined or key performance indicators when it comes to measuring the performance of an economy. So we understand that when it comes from an individual perspective, if you'd want to see whether you're doing well financially, you're doing well from different angles of life, there are certain elements that you look at when it comes to your personal life that you can use to map yourself or to map your progress in relation to whether you are achieving your objectives or not. So the same applies on an economy. So an economy can also be looked at it as an individual, since it affects various elements within an economy as well, where you'd want to assess whether that particular economy is performing very well or whether that particular economy is not performing very well. It needs to take medication if it is not feeling well or if it is not performing very well. So in relation to that, we have what is referred to as macroeconomic objectives. So these macroeconomic objectives are key guidelines that are used in order to measure whether an economy is performing very well. If you want to measure an economy against itself, or if you'd want to measure that particular economy against other economies as well, you need to have some form of guidelines that you have. So the first of the objectives that we have is what we refer to as economic growth. The second is what we have is what we refer to as price stability. The third is full employment. The fourth is external stability or balance of payment stability. Then the fifth is what we refer to as equitable distribution of income and wealth. So we're going to be looking at these one by one and disassembling, demystifying some of the key elements that comes as a result of that. So in relation to economic growth, from the word economic growth, we understand that it's sort of like self-explanatory when it comes to that, but we need to get an understanding of how do we measure economic growth. So when you're talking about the growth of an economy, we need to have key fundamental metrics that we use to measure or to assess the growth of an economy. So in order for us to measure the growth of an economy, we need to understand the importance of growth itself before we talk about economic growth. Is it important for an economy to grow, or is it not important for an economy to grow? So within the economics schools of thought, or within the realms of economics, there's been so many arguments in relation to growth. There you find out that there are some scholars that are pro-growth, some scholars are against growth because of some of the elements that comes along with it. Some say that when you have economic growth, it distorts so many elements within a particular economy, so hence it is not supposed to be something that we advocate for. So some are against economic growth, some are for economic growth. So in terms of growth itself, from a natural perspective, we understand that growth is something that is fundamental when, whether it's from an agricultural perspective, when you plant a tree, when you plant a seed into the ground, at some point you expect it to germinate, you expect it to begin to bud and to produce leaves. If it is even from a humanistic perspective, when you give birth to a child, you expect the child to grow under normal circumstances. You expect the child at some point to begin to talk, to begin to grow, to begin to interact with the physical environment in different ways. So the same applies with the economy. Is when you're looking at an economy, you would not want to have a scenario where the economy is stagnant, or where the economy is growing negatively, that is where the economy is shrinking. You'd want the economy to grow on a time-to-time basis. So you'd expect from a certain period of time, you'd assess the economy and you'd see that there is progress in terms of the economy itself. So what then that brings us to is, how then do we assess that economic growth? So in order for us to assess economic growth, we use a key metric that is referred to as gross domestic product, which I'll highlight here. Gross domestic product. So gross domestic product is a proxy that is used to measure the performance of an economy from an economic growth perspective. So in relation to that, it is used to assess whether the economy is growing or whether the economy is not growing. So let's define what gross domestic product is. So by definition, gross domestic product is referred to as the total market value of all the goods and services that are produced within a country's borders. So the key subcategories within the particular definition are of prime importance: the total market value of all the production of what, goods and services, and where is this production taking place within a country's borders. So when you're talking about gross domestic product, we're looking at the production that is taking place within the South African borders. That does not include production that is taking place in Swaziland, in Lesotho, in Zimbabwe, or in Botswana, in any other country that is not within the South African jurisdiction. So that is important because you'd want to measure and to assess the performance of the local economy, whether it is growing or whether it is not growing. So when it comes to measuring gross domestic product, there are different approaches that are used, which we are going to be talking about now, or the measures that are used to measure gross domestic product. there is one that is referred to as I'll start with the most popular one, which is the expenditure approach. The expenditure approach. Then we have the income approach. Then we have what is referred to as the value added or the production approach. So all of these approaches are very, very important when it comes to measuring gross domestic product. So from an expenditure approach, you're trying to measure gross domestic product from the perspective of the expenditures or the spending that took place within a particular economy. So in relation to that, you'd want to measure gross domestic product as the sum total of the spending that has taken place within a particular economy. Sum total of spending. I'll explain where this comes from and why this is so. So sum total of the expenditure would be the sum of the economic growth. Then from an income perspective, you'd want to measure how much the factors of production that we talked about earlier on were remunerated. So how much income the factors of production received would be the definition, or would be the value of the gross domestic product in relation to an income approach. So in relation to that, you're looking at the sum of the salaries and wages, the rents, the interest that all of the factors of production received, and you'd want to calculate the sum total of that. And the sum total of that in general would become the value of your gross domestic product. So that becomes imperatively important. Then from your value added approach, you're looking at how much value in terms of production has been added from a particular product from its inception as a raw material until it becomes a final good. Remember, gross domestic product, it is the total value of the final goods that have been produced, not intermediate goods. So these are final goods that are being produced. So you look at the value addition that has taken place across the production value chain, and we try to define that as a gross domestic product. So why is it that we use these different approaches and we expect the same result in terms of the same value in terms of the gross domestic product? It is because of the circular flow of income and spending that we were looking at earlier on, where we stated that it starts from the production by firms. It starts from the production by the firms that are taking advantage of the factors of production. So as they are acquiring these factors of production, they are remunerating these factors of production with various elements like your income, wages and salaries, your interest. And as a result of that, of their use of the factors of production, they then produce goods and services which are then sold within this particular economy. And you'd find out that that is an unending circular flow that is occurring within a particular economy. You can see the production perspective where the firm is producing the goods, the total amount of goods, the value addition that is taking place, and you'd find out that within the goods market. And those same goods that are being sold within the goods market, the households are spending on those particular goods. That is where your expenditure approach comes from. And as they're spending, you basically are able to aggregate how much has been produced from the expenditure perspective. And from the income perspective, you can see how much they have received in terms of income. And that is also a signatory, or not a signatory, a signal of how much production has taken place. The income that they are receiving is a signal of how much income is taking place within this particular economy. So you find out that all of this becomes a circular flow of production, spending, and income. That is where these three major flows comes from. Production, that is the firms producing, how much they are producing is going to be spent on by the households. And these households, where they're getting their income from the firms that are producing, and they're taking advantage of their factors of production. So when individuals have skills, they go into the labor market, they are remunerated there. When they have capital, they take it to the capital markets, they're given interest. When they are good at enterprising, they start entities, they're given profits as a result of that. So this creates the three major flows within a particular economy. So if you are examined on the three major flows, it's spending, production, and income. So these are the three approaches that are used to measure gross domestic product. All right, so we are going to be zooming in on one of the approaches, which is referred to as the expenditure approach. So the expenditure approach measures gross domestic product as the sum total of all the spending elements within a particular economy. So in a domestic economy without the foreign sector, you'd find out that the expenditure or the total expenditure is made up of the spending by households, investment spending by firms, as well as government expenditure. When the government has been introduced into the particular economy, you would find out that you would have those particular elements. So when we now introduce the foreign sector, which you're going to be talking about earlier on, that is where your exports and your income, your imports come into play. But from a domestic perspective, you would have consumption spending by households, investment spending by firms, as well as government spending as a result of that. That gives you the sum total of gross domestic product. So this is a key element when it comes to measuring the performance of an economy, because it highlights whether an economy is moving in the right direction or not. So now, how do we use gross domestic product to measure whether an economy is growing? So economic growth will then be defined as, so we say economic growth would be defined as current year's gross domestic product. So we are just trying to calculate an incremental element that has occurred minus previous year's gross domestic product. Divide that by the previous year's gross domestic product. Then you multiply that by 100 if you want to get a percentage. So when you hear that the economy is expected to be growing by 5%, 3%, they would have aggregated the action that is going to be taking place within that particular economy and comparing it with the previous year or any years that is being used to compare that with, in order for them to assess whether the economy is growing or not. So I'm sure you've seen in the news headlines where they're talking about the economic growth projections, either when the Reserve Bank governor is introducing his monetary policy or when the finance minister is introducing his budget. They talk about these growth projections, whether the economy is expected to grow or whether the economy is not expected to grow. So this becomes important, because if the gross domestic product is not increasing, or rather it is reducing, it means that the economy is not producing as much as it was producing, and is going to be affecting many other economic variables at the same time. When there's a reduction in production, a lot of elements are affected as a result of that. The first casualty there would be your labor force, employment. So you find out that employment reduces as a result of that, because there is a reduction in gross domestic product. That is where you find unemployment increasing. That is where you find potentially elements like price instability, inflation also kicking in, because there's little production and potentially a higher demand, and that creates inflation. That is where now the subject of inflation comes into play, because if the economy is not growing, it means that you're going to be having problems of unemployment. You're also going to be having problems of inflation. You're going to be having problems of distribution of income and wealth within that particular economy as a result of that. So that creates a myriad of problems within that particular economy as well. So that is it with your economic growth, which is your first objective. The second objective is full employment. So from there, we've already introduced full employment. So when you talk about full employment, you're talking about the full use of the factors of production within a particular economy in order to fully utilize all of what is available within that particular economy. So it becomes imperatively important, because from an efficiency perspective, you do not want to waste. From the subject of economics itself, I'm sure from a microeconomics perspective, you've been introduced to the word efficiency, where you would want to maximize of all the factors of production that are available, and you do not want to leave any factors redundant. So when you're leaving factors of production redundant, you are creating elements where certain factors are left idling. And it does not mean that they're being left idling as a result of just leaving them just like that, but it's going to be impacting the people or the individuals or the quality of life within that particular economy, because when there is unemployment, it comes as a result of as well the definition of not fully utilizing the economy. So unemployment becomes key when it comes to measuring the performance of an economy from a full employment perspective. So we understand that there are various factors of production like pure capital, enterprising skills, etc. But all of that would narrow down to the use of the labor capital within that particular market. So if labor is not fully utilized within a particular market, all of the factors of production would also eventually not be fully utilized as well. You'd find out that your natural resources would not be fully utilized, your capital as well would not be fully utilized as a result of that. So that becomes imperatively important for us to narrow down the subject of full employment to unemployment. When you look at to what extent are we fully utilizing the skills, the labor skills that are available within a particular economy, and some of the issues that come as a result of that. We've already identified economic growth as one of the key contributors to unemployment and how it introduces unemployment into an economy. So now what we need to understand is what is it that we define as unemployment? So there are various definitions when it comes to unemployment. There are strict definitions, there are expanded definitions. So you'd find out some of these terms are used when, especially in the news, when you're talking about the subject of unemployment. So in general, unemployment refers to the percentage of the labor force that is not employed. So basically, when you're looking at the labor force and individuals that are not employed, that is the general perspective of unemployment. And the individuals that are not employed in relation to that particular spectrum, we refer to that as unemployment. But from a strict definition perspective, now excludes certain individuals, for instance, individuals that are discouraged from looking for work, that have given up in terms of the hope of finding employment within the labor market, and they've just given up in terms of looking for employment. Those are excluded from what is referred to as a strict definition of unemployment, and that is referred to as the percentage of labor force that is actively seeking for employment but cannot find the employment. So when you have individuals that are actively seeking for employment within the labor markets but cannot find that particular employment, we refer to that as unemployment from a strict definition. So this becomes imperatively important whether you're looking at it from a strict or expanded definition. As long as you have unemployment within a particular economy, it is a problem. There is what is referred to as the natural rate of unemployment, where it is allowed to be within a certain percentage of the population of an economy, 3 to 5%. But beyond that, it is regarded as bad, because obviously it means that the economy is not producing enough in order to absorb everyone that is available in terms of looking for employment within the particular economy, and thus creating a gap in terms of unemployment. So for instance, the expanded definition in South Africa is unemployment at 42%, the strict definition I think at around 32%, which is also a problem in relation to the South African economy and the issue in relation to unemployment. So unemployment also need to be looked at from a closer perspective, where you look at the different categories of unemployment, which you're going to be looking at when we look at unemployment as a topic on its own. I think Unit 7 somewhere there, where we look at the different categories of unemployment. You have a frictional unemployment, seasonal unemployment, structural unemployment, your cyclical unemployment, etc. So we are not going to be looking at these ones for now. We're going to be talking about them later on. So they can be subcategorized depending with the causality of them. Where is the cause coming from? What is causing this type of unemployment within an economy? So from the causality perspective, you would be able to understand the different types of unemployment as they occur within a particular economy. So this becomes important because you would know what to address if you're a policymaker, if you are within echelons of decision making. You would know what to address in order to look and to provide a particular panacea of each type of unemployment that is available within a particular economy. So that is it with full employment. Then the third economic objective is price stability. So price stability does not necessarily mean zero inflation or zero increases in prices, but it generally refers to a situation where the prices are generally stable in such a way that you do not have incidences of inflation, which refers to the sustained increase in the general price level. So the general price level refers to an aggregated basket of goods or services that are aggregated and given different weightings, and that is used to track the overall price level within a particular economy. So in relation to that, it is used to measure whether an economy is having inflation or not. You're going to be looking at it when you look at inflation as well as a topic on its own. I think on Unit 6, when you look at inflation as a topic on its own. So it is used to measure whether an economy is having stable prices or not, whether there is stability in terms of the price ranges that are occurring within a particular economy. So inflation in itself is something that is not good. Sometimes it is referred to as the number one public enemy, or it is referred to as the number one devil of any economy. So you'd find out that whenever inflation rears its ugly head in an economy, that economy is certainly bound for a collapse. It's certainly bound for an irrecoverable collapse. So we've been having different case studies of inflation, countries like Zimbabwe, countries like Argentina, countries like Germany have had series of inflation where the economy eventually collapsed entirely, where at some point they would have inflation rates. I think in Zimbabwe, it had some zillion percentages in terms of the growth in the price levels, where they ended up having to print zeros, adding zeros to their currencies, etc. We're also going to be looking at that when you look at the monetary sector, as well as when you look at inflation as a topic on its own, having an understanding in relation to how inflation affects the economy. So this is a situation that is not good for any economy, because it means that the purchasing power of the currency is drastically reduced, and the incomes that individuals are receiving are also not going to be able to purchase the goods and services that are going to be produced within the particular goods market. And as a result, the standards of living of individuals would then swiftly dwindle. And you'd find out that there are so many issues that comes as a result of inflation, lack of public trust in the financial systems, banking systems. Everyone would want to withdraw their funds as soon as they reflect, because they would want to speculate on whether the prices are going to be increasing or whether the prices are not going to be increasing, and take advantage of any economic opportunities that are there to move their value into safe havens rather than keeping it as cash. So that destroys an economy. So that is also something that is also important, especially from a South African perspective. The value of the rand itself, inflation that has been taking place from the year 2010 up until now, how much 100 rand is able to purchase and how much it was able to purchase 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 15 years ago. That is also imperatively important in relation to that. So that becomes important. So inflation also comes in different types and approaches that comes as a result of that. There's cost push inflation or demand pull inflation, where you look at the causality as well. What is it that is causing inflation, and elements that we can use in order to address that type of inflation as well. So that becomes also important for us to understand. We're going to be looking at some of these particular graphs here. This is a demand pull inflation graph. We're going to be looking at it later on. Then there's a cost push inflation graph as well. So we're going to be looking at these ones later on. Then the fourth economic objective is external stability, where you are trying to have a balance between the local economy and the external economy. So the local economy does not operate in a vacuum. It needs to take advantage of resources that come from other countries. It needs to produce goods that are demanded as well in other countries. For instance, South Africa produces wine that is required in other countries. They produce a lot of goods and services also that are required, agricultural produce that are required in the European Union. And South Africa as well consumes goods and services that comes from other countries as well. Services, you have your Netflix, Starlink is not yet in South Africa. You have elements in relation to goods and services that are produced from other countries. You consume technologies, your iPhones that come from other countries. So all of that creates a situation where an economy would need to import. So an import refers to the purchase of goods from the external economy into the local economy. And at the same time, you would need to export, which is the sale of goods from the local economy to the external economy at the same time. However, what makes this important is the fact that if you looked at the expenditure approach that we used to calculate inflation, let me just go back to it, you'd see that an import is regarded as a negative addition to gross domestic product. I don't know if you had noticed that. Let me just bring you back to that. So you see here, gross domestic product is equals to C, consumption spending, investment spending by firms, government spending, then exports are a positive, then imports are a negative. So this is the balance of payments stability that we're talking about, which is in brackets here, X minus M. So imports are a negative addition to an economy, meaning that whenever you're importing, it is not positively adding to the gross domestic product, but it is negatively adding. Why? Because there is an outflow of value from the local economy to the external economy. And what does that mean? It means that you are supporting an external economy from a local economy. So that means that you're supporting employment in other countries, you're supporting the growth of other countries, you're supporting, which is not bad, you're supporting the growth of other countries or the stability of other countries. However, that needs to be looked at it from a balanced perspective, where you also look at how much are you exporting to other countries as well. So that is where your Donald Trump comes into play, where he wants to impose tariffs, where he's saying that America has been ribbed for the past how many years, I don't know. So he needs to impose tariffs in order to match this balance of payments and ensure that there is a balance in the wrong one. Of course, that comes as a result of its pros and cons, which you're going to be looking at when you look at the external economy as well. So that becomes imperatively important for us to have the balance in terms of exports and imports, because it also affects other variables like your currency stability. The value of the rand is also influenced by how much you are importing and how much you're exporting, because it determines the demand that you're going to be placing in the foreign exchange market of the United States dollar, as well as the demand for the South African rand, also influencing its prices as well. So we're going to be looking at that one later on and how it affects the local economy. Then lastly is the distribution of income and wealth as a measure of the performance of an economy. So the distribution of income and wealth within a particular economy is imperatively important, because it highlights the extent to which resources are distributed, as well as individuals are benefiting from the production that is taking place within an economy. So if you're talking about economic growth, how much is it inclusive in relation to everyone benefiting from it? So that's where you look at to what extent is the economy evenly distributed. That's where your Gini coefficient, Gini index comes into play, which measures the distribution of income and wealth within a particular economy. So this particular Gini index is very, very important when it comes to measuring the distribution of wealth and wealth within a particular nation. So it ranges from 0 to 1. So that is its range. It ranges from 0 to 1, with 0 being a situation where it's an imaginary situation where there is perfect equality, and 1 being the worst in terms of inequality. So that means when you're having 1, it means, okay, let's start with 0. 0 is perfect equality. Let's say perfect equality. That means each individual is equally benefiting from the resources that are being produced within a particular economy. There's no one who's more richer than the other person. Everyone is at par. Then 1, this is a perfectly unequal society. So a perfectly unequal society would then signal a situation where there is total inequality. So in this particular instance, it means that 90% or 99% of individuals within the particular economy do not have access to the same to the same wealth or to the same resources. And as a result, that creates a situation which is likely to be explosive. So in relation to that, this is a key sensitive area when it comes to South Africa, because among the Gini coefficients that has been measured around the world, South Africa ranks the worst. When it comes to the Gini coefficient, I think it's ranging from 0.63, if I'm not mistaken. South Africa's Gini coefficient currently, I think it's at 0.63 the last time I checked. So there was a point where it was at 0.67, an indication of the inequality that exists within the South African perspective. So that comes as a result of different elements, and it needs to be addressed as well from different elements in terms of education, etc. And all of these other elements, we're going to be looking at it as a topic on its own when you look at the economic development and growth as well, and get an understanding of some of the key elements in relation to that. All right, so that brings us to the end of today's presentation. But before we close, let's look at some of the questions that come along in relation to what we've just looked at. So these are exam type questions. We're going to be looking at this one, then also flip to the other question paper that we have there. So in relation to that, there is a particular question with two questions here that would then test our understanding of what we were talking about in the last hour. So this is an exam extract where question one read, I hope you're seeing it. Let me just zoom in. Let me just zoom in so that you can see it. All right. Okay, so question number one reads, which of the following is a macroeconomic topic? A, share price of MTN. B, the unemployment rate in South Africa. C, supply and demand for clothing. D, the budget of an individual household. Which one? So I expect to see answers in the chat, or I think the chat would. Okay, B. Someone says B. B. I see everyone is agreeing at B. That is correct. That is the macroeconomic topic. So share price is an individual market. Unemployment is a macroeconomic element. Then question number two reads, in an economy where the government aims to achieve full employment, which of the following scenarios would best indicate the economy that has reached its objective? A, the unemployment rate is 0. B, some individuals have been retrenched. C, there is high level of frictional unemployment due to workers searching for better opportunities. Then then D reads, the economy is operating at potential output with its available resources fully utilized in production resources. Let's see what you guys are saying here.
Oh, sorry, please, can you move your paper up? We are still on question number one. Thank you.
All right. All right, let me reread again. It reads, the economy where the government aims to achieve full employment. Which of the following scenarios would best indicate that the economy has reached its objective? The unemployment is at 0%. Some individuals have been retrenched. There is high level of frictional unemployment. The economy is operating at potential output with all available resources fully utilized in the production process. Okay, so let's see what people are saying here. D. So everyone is saying, it's D. Okay, so I think everyone is understanding, and I'm very much happy with what I'm seeing. Let's look at the ones that we have here, which was written in, I think, as part of the closing. We just close in the next 5 minutes. So this one reads, consider a scenario where the government is, I hope you're seeing the question paper. Let me just check again. Can you see the question paper, which is July 2023 on your screen?
Yes, we can see.
Okay. All right. So question number one reads, consider a scenario where the government is implementing a policy to increase minimum wage nationwide. Which of the following aspects of the policy discussion is not a macroeconomic topic? A, the potential impact of unemployment rate in South Africa. B, how Woolworths will adjust their hiring practices in response to the wage increases. C, the effect of policy on aggregate demand and inflation in the economy. Then D, analysis of distributional effects of increases in the minimum wages on different income groups. All right, I see answers are popping in. I see everyone is, or majority are saying B. That is 100% correct. So Woolworths is an individual firm that is not aggregated economy. So that is very, very correct. Then question number 2, assume that the central bank has successfully maintained price stability for the past decade, with inflation rates averaging 2% annually, despite fluctuations in global oil prices, occasionally supply shocks. The country has managed to keep its overall price levels relatively constant. Based on this scenario, which of the following statements is most likely to be true regarding the impact of price stability on this economy of this particular country? All right, so we've been told that we are assuming the central bank successfully maintained stable inflation with inflation rates surrounding 2% annually. Despite global oil fluctuations and occasional supply shocks, the country managed to keep its overall price level relatively constant. So based on that particular scenario, which of the is most likely to be true regarding the impact of price stability on this particular economy? A, businesses in this country frequently adjust their prices in response to changes in demand and supply. B, consumers in this country experience unpredictable and significant fluctuations in the prices of essential goods and services. C, the country faces persistent periods of high inflation and deflation. Then D, the environment in this country fosters investor confidence, encourages long-term planning, and supports sustainable economic growth. So these are some of the twists that you get in the questions. All right, let's see the answers that we see here. I see D, I see A, I see mixed answers. I see A, I see D. All right, so the correct answer here is the one that is talking about investor confidence. It encourages long-term planning and supports sustainable economic growth. Why is that so? Because remember, this economy has been successfully implementing price stability for around 2%. So in that particular scenario, even if global oil prices increases, it doesn't affect the local economy because there is higher levels of investor confidence due to the ability of the central bank to manage inflation. So therefore, you'd find out that within such a scenario, that wouldn't affect the local price because they have the confidence in the central bank's ability in managing inflation. So correct, that is D. Then last but not least is question 3. If South Africa is currently trading at 18 Rand per dollar, a trade balance deficit of 12 billion Rand would lead to. If the South African Rand is trading at 18 Rand per dollar, a trade balance deficit is leading to. So a deficit is a situation where the imports are greater than the exports. And whenever you're having imports greater than exports, what is that going to be impacting in terms of the South African Rand? A change to the value of the currency to 16 Rand per dollar. B, a change to the value of the currency to 20 Rand per dollar. Then C, a change in the unemployment rate from 25% to 22%. Then D, an increase in foreign direct investment. Let's see the answers that you have here. So I see B, I see D, I see D, I see B, I see D. All right, so let's get an understanding. So you're having a situation where the current exchange rate is 18 Rand per dollar. And there's a budget balance, trade balance deficit. This is a situation where you are importing more than you are exporting. So when you're importing more than you're exporting, what is happening is you're putting pressure on the foreign exchange market. You are demanding more of the US dollars on the foreign exchange markets. And what does that do to the value of the rand when you're demanding more of the foreign exchange of the US dollar within the foreign exchange markets? What does that do to the South African rand? It means the South African rand is going to depreciate. And what is the best possible scenario from the answers that we have that signify a depreciation in the South African rand? This is a situation where you have you're having a greater value of the rand to the dollar now. The greater value of the rand to the dollar. So that's a situation where you have option B as the answer, a change in the value of the currency to 20 rand per dollar. That's a depreciation. Remember, it was at 18. Now it's at 20. It's indicating that you're putting demand on the foreign exchange market to buy US dollars in order for you to purchase from the United States, whatever it is that they're producing there, to buy Teslas from the United States. So the correct answer for this one is option B. All right, so I hope you took note of that for those that were saying D and for those that were saying A. So A is not the correct answer because A is an appreciation in the currency. So if the currency is appreciating, it means that it's signifying that the rand is the one that is being demanded more than the US dollar, and probably that is usually associated with a trade surplus. So that is not the correct answer. And an increase in foreign direct investment is also not true because you are not buying from the local economy, you are buying from the external economy, which means that the investments would rather go to those economies where you're buying from rather than the local economy. All right, so that brings us to the end of today's presentation. Thank you very much for your attentiveness and your attention and your time and your attention. Thank you very much. I think we can call it a day. I don't know if anyone has any particular question. It's open for questions, contributions, or anything. All right. So there are no questions. I hope you find this helpful. Okay, so I hope to see you again in the coming, thank you, in the coming sessions. Until we meet again, goodbye.